He mihi mahana kia koutou katoa. My name is Carla Hokamo and I am currently the Interim Dean of the Business School, and this is my first Professorial Inaugural lecture that I get to announce, and I'm so happy that it's for our friend, my friend, Business School's friend, Mike Lee. Professor Michael Chiawai Lee. Kia ora, Michael.
Kia ora.
The wonderful lead in time in the networking drinks prior was really good. It's so good to see so many old friends come in this evening to be with us. And, you know, not many people could draw a crowd on a windy Auckland night, driving from the west, from the east and from the south than you might, because you're one of ours. And I'm so happy to do this for you. I'll do the formal bit, where I talk a little bit about your background and then I'll hand it over. Tonight we gather not only to celebrate a significant academic milestone, but to honour a scholar whose work has challenged conventional thinking and opened new pathways of inquiry in the field of marketing. Mike's promotion to Professor is a testament to a sustained excellence in research, teaching and academic leadership. Mike's journey has been one of innovation and impact, and he's one of ours. Since completing his PhD here at Waipapatau Matarau, the University of Auckland in 2007, same year as me, Mike, I have been impressed with how Mike has carved out a distinctive niche in the study of anti-consumption, a field he helped pioneer and formalise through the founding of the International Centre for Anti-Consumption Research. His work has shed light on the way that consumers resist, reject and reframe their relationships with brands, products and institutions. His research has appeared in top-tier journals internationally. He's earned recognition worldwide and sparked conversations in media outlets ranging from the Wall Street Journal to the BBC. And yet, what further distinguishes Mike is his ability to translate complex ideas into meaningful learning experiences for our students, but also the way that he translates his work in the public domain. As the Director of the MBA and Assistant Dean of Professional Programs, he has helped lead transformative changes in our curriculum, design digital innovation and student engagement, and we're really proud of all the mahi and the work that Mike does, and I can always trust Mike to really represent us so well in that sphere. Tonight's lecture, titled When Consumers Say No, Understanding Market Rejection in Modern Society, is promising to be thought-provoking and insightful. So without further delay, please join me in welcoming Professor Michael Lee to the stage. No reira, kia ora koutou katoa.
Thank you. All right, everybody, thank you. Can you hear me in the back? Yep, all right, cool. Hey, thank you. Kia ora koutou, for fighting the weather. You guys are the committed bunch. I know it wasn't easy getting here, so I do appreciate it. As you can see, the academic stuff behind me is about when consumers say no. So I do promise we will look into some of the academic stuff, but what you guys are probably really here for is to hear a little bit of an origin story of how I ended up being a professor in marketing. And there is some stuff that I never ever get a chance to talk about. I lecture a lot on academic stuff and marketing concepts. For you guys this evening, I will be talking about parts of my life that I have never discussed in public. So you've got that to look forward to. Yeah. And ironically, it'll probably be, you won't remember any of the academic stuff at all. But this is an opportunity. These inaugural lectures are a big deal, as you probably would have ascertained. But it is a chance for the university to extend some goodwill towards the public. So it's really great to see people that are not usually in the university sort of environment. You're always welcome here. We are a public institute. And this is a chance, a very rare glimpse into the people behind the research. And so hopefully you'll get a chance to learn a bit about me. Even my colleagues in marketing will learn some things about me. So we can't really start without going right back to the beginning. So this is my mum, as you can see on your left, and my dad on the right, in their prime, so to speak, younger than I am now. That baby with a toaster-shaped head is me. So a little bit about my parents. Simasun Lee, or Simasun, her maiden name, who never finished never went to university, but nonetheless became very successful in her own right, becoming the real estate salesperson of the year in 1991. And so it's really good to see some of her old colleagues, Alex back there, David, Lance, some of her old colleagues from Barfoot's here, who watched me grow up, not from that age, but from probably about 12 onwards. So yeah, really proud of what my mum's accomplished. She made a success during a time in New Zealand history that we would never get away with calling it that these days. But some of you Gen Xers will know what we called it in the 90s, the Asian invasion. That's what they called it. And that was when all the people were leaving Taiwan and Hong Kong because they weren't sure what would happen when China took Hong Kong back, and they wanted to spend their money, secure it somewhere in a place like New Zealand. And so my mum, speaking 4 different Chinese dialects, capitalized on that moment and is probably responsible for the increase in housing prices since the 90s. So very proud of you, Mum. The other character on the right there, very different, both in terms of personality and academic sort of background. My father, who actually did his PhD at this very university way back in the 70s when I was born. And so he did his PhD in organic chemistry, and he has worked for the university until this June. In his 80s, he retired after 38 years of service to the Cancer Research Society. Probably 13 to 15 different patents based on compounds that collectively probably have saved hundreds of thousands of lives around the world in a battle against cancer. So normally I don't, and I might add, one of 15 brothers and sisters. The first in his family to finish a university education. So I don't normally abuse my privilege over the crowd, but today I will abuse this, and I'll ask you all to join me in thanking my parents. Okay, so for the next photo, I have to warn you to protect your eyeballs. You will not see another photo with as much retro yellow and orange as this one. So this was me in the 70s. So we grew up, I was born in New Zealand when my dad was here doing his studies. During his postdoc, I moved around a lot as a family. We went from here over to Vancouver, then Buffalo, New York, then over to Manchester, where I was a really cool kid, as you can see. And then from Manchester, we went to Singapore. So this is a picture of that time. So the woman on the left is my maternal grandmother, so my mum's mum. And then the tiny woman in the middle that pumped out 15 kids was my father's mother and my grandfather on my father's side. Unfortunately, my maternal grandfather had died when I was really young. So this is a picture, it's a stage, it's one of those staged pictures. I don't know where it is exactly, but we lived with my paternal grandma and grandfather in Singapore in the 80s in a 3-bedroom apartment so there was the 3 of us, the 2 of them, an uncle, an auntie, 2 cousins, and my father's youngest brother, so an uncle. So 10 of us in a 3-bedroom apartment, no air conditioning in Singapore in the 80s. It's pretty hard. We go back there now and it's air conditioning everywhere, but back then it was really hot and really uncomfortable and super stressful in terms of the school. For any of you that have grown up in Singapore, you'll know what I'm talking about. So shortly after that, we went to Canada, where my brother was born. So Alex, this is my nephew here. That's your dad when he was young. He looks just like you, right? Look at that. I obviously had a struggling relationship with Coke and ice cream when I was young. So the top 2 photos are us growing up in Canada, where my brother was in fact born. And the bottom one is when we finally came back at about 11 and a half, 12, back to New Zealand, our first house in Mount Roskill, where we finally were able to set some roots down and buy a dog, which we always wanted. May his soul rest in peace, Plucky. So my brother and I, both very intellectual characters. He also is a graduate of the School of Engineering, University of Auckland. You'll start to see a trend here. And I'm very fortunate, thank you Stephen and Sholin and Bree, who's not here, for allowing me to save this inaugural for a Northern Hemisphere holiday season so that he could be here with his wife, Miranda, and my nephew, Alex, who's being a very good boy sitting there paying attention. And Miranda, guess what university they met at? The University of Auckland, also in engineering, right? It's like we should get some sort of loyalty scheme for coming here. So growing up, I watched, and my dad will remember this, I used to love nature documentaries. I used to watch all the big game ones like cheetahs chasing down prey, prides of lion, elephants, all those big African mammals. So I wanted to be a big game zoologist, right? And then we moved to New Zealand. And it's like, we don't have any mammals at all. We got a bat, that's about it. So I needed to pivot very quickly. And this is a theme you'll see throughout this whole thing, is that I'd never really planned to be here as a professor. Things just kind of fell in place. So I pivoted into marine biology because I thought, okay, well, in New Zealand, surrounded by oceans, I love zoology and biology. If I could be a marine biologist, then I could have a potential, I could be a scientist or I could be a marine aquaculturalist, right? So that made sense to me. And then stage 2 genetics put a stop to that. I was like, oh, I didn't fail, but I did not enjoy thinking that way. So no more genetics for me. I pivoted yet again into psychology, right? And this is where I found my passion. Psychology, consumer psychology, not the clinical stuff, but the social psychology. John Duckett became my master supervisor, and I see some colleagues here, Karen and Ian, and a number of other people, Vanessa, from the psych department in the old days, and John, so thank you very much for coming. So I finished my BSc in psychology, minoring in biology, so flipped that around. Did well enough, thought I'd stay on and do a master's in industrial organizational psychology. And that was the first point where I started to venture into what they call the dark side, the business side, right? Using our knowledge of humans to either exploit more labor out of them or sell them stuff they don't need. And during that time, I was also a poster child for the psychology department. So that's me and a friend at the time, Vincent. We don't know what we're doing in this picture, by the way. We literally, this was filmed at the bottom of the HSB. It was known as now the Social Work and Education Building. Sensation Perception Labs, so some of the people in the psych department will know what I'm talking about. They basically just said, look, you two are psych students, you've got a heartbeat, come down, pretend you know what you're doing. Bingo, filmed it, look intelligent, and we were on the prospectus. Now, the other reason I do psychology, and only those closest to me will know the real reason why I did psychology, and at the time, I didn't know what I was doing because I hadn't done marketing before. But what I was actually doing when I chose to do psychology was a classic example of segmenting, targeting, and positioning in order to get a girlfriend. The ratio in psychology between male and females were very favorable if you're a male product. And so this was Christina back in our youth. Well, you're very much back in our youth. But fast forward, here she is, still gorgeous. She's right here. You might recognize her as the senior neuropsychologist in the TV show, The Restaurant That Makes Mistakes, season 2. That's why she looks familiar. So anyone here, you've got family members worried about dementia, she is available for private consultation. But together we have Amelia, who is now the tallest member of our family. It's kind of poetic this year. My father retired from his 38 years of service at university. I get made professor, and Amelia joins, guess which university? The University of Auckland. She's doing an LLB MSc, and she's here with her buddies. Thanks for coming. And this is one of our favorite pictures of our family that Kirk, my best friend, helped set up, obviously based on The Simpsons. We used to have a deaf white cat, Nino, may his soul rest in peace, and a neurotic cavoodle, Milo. So, now, this is a hint. When you've done study from kindergarten all the way through to bachelor's and then through to master's, you get kind of sick of thinking intellectually, right? And so the most logical thing you can do when you've had enough of the academics is, of course, to become a professional wrestler. And you might be thinking, what, is he serious? And I guarantee you I am. So, just a bit of context. Growing up in the 80s and 90s, during the height of Hulkamania, may he rest in peace as well, I have very fond memories of my brother and I wrestling in our backyard trampoline in Mount Roskill. And we're not talking one of these new fandangled trampolines with a safety net. We're talking about 1980s trampoline with a steel bar around the edges and the bear trap of the springs with the nasty hooks that every time you took a step too far back, your leg would get ripped up. So, as far as I was concerned, we were doing far more riskier things at home than what could be done in real life. So, without further ado, I went to Boston for 9 months on a visa, joined Killer Kowalski's School of Professional Wrestling, and proceeded to be a professional wrestler for 9 months. A couple of pictures I want to point out. Obviously, Killer's down the bottom. He was the owner of the school. Managed to meet some of my childhood heroes back in the time. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat on the right with the checkered shirt there. Do a bit of wrestling. And another funny story. This is 25 years ago or so, or even more, in America, in sort of, the type of environment that likes wrestling. So you'll see a picture in the middle right there. It's me and this only other Asian guy in Boston at the time, Howie. And I literally walked into the school and they said, hey, you're Asian, you're together, you're called the Orient Express. And hence, my tag team career had begun. Another fond memory, you'll see bottom left-hand corner for you here, me with Slick Wagner Brown. That was really his name. Slick Wagner Brown in a headlock. We were great friends, but we also fought with each other. And I remember very distinctly, when they were cheering for me, they would say, we love rice, we love rice. And then when they turned around and he started winning, the crowd would start chanting, KFC, KFC. Seriously. So, as a Gen X, we have a very funny relationship with racism. And this really played out in America. But anyway, 9 months later, my visa ran out. And this was before the time where they gave you a free trip to El Salvador. So I had to leave. But before then, I guess, the other highlight was we were invited as a school to go backstage to there was called a WWF at the time, SmackDown. So what they would do is they would travel around. I know you're out there, they're real professional wrestling fans. They would travel around city to city. And when they came around SmackDown in Boston, we were invited backstage. I had a sort of a talent pack that I put together, a video, handed to another guy, which happened to be a Kiwi. Tony Garrett was his name. Had been with the WWF for ages. He said, look, I'll hand this to the right people. And then my visa ran out, left the country, came back here. A couple of months later, got an email from Kevin Keller, who was basically the right-hand man to Vince McMahon back in the day, with an email saying, hey, Mike, I got your talent pack, and we would love to have you the next time we travel around to Boston, which is great, because normally it takes years to get on their radar, and I managed to do this in 9 months, so I was happy with that. Unfortunately, my visa had run out, so I said, is there any form of sort of sponsorship, visa sort of sponsorship? And that wasn't something they did because they had insane amounts of people that wanted to work for them without the visa issues, right? You have to remember, this was back in the days before UFC took off and professional wrestling it was basically between them and Monday Night Football for the highest rating shows on TV. So anyway, I was happy to sort of, call it a day and finish off and come back home and continue my PhD. So I guess the only thing left now before that is to ask you guys if you guys want to see a highlight reel of the international superstar Zenith. Okay. All right. Okay. See, it's worth coming here on a Tuesday night. Here we go. So hopefully you guys have learned something about me you didn't know. A couple of things that I did learn from professional wrestling that I kind of carried on throughout, and probably even without knowing, into my academic career. So one of the things that I remember them saying when I first got into that world, they had the saying, and the saying was, make the other guy look good. That was one of the culture that was there. And funnily, wrestling is one of those things where you're pretending to kill each other, but you're actually doing everything you can to protect the other person you're working with. So it's actually a super supportive environment. Make the other guy look good, or make the other person you look good, make the people you work with look good. And if the other people think the same thing, that's how you lift everyone's game. So that was a really good lesson. Second thing was let them know what comes next. So wrestling is one of these things. And in fact, I have a PhD student here, Jessica, who's doing really fascinating work on brand gestures. And wrestling is one of these case studies where they have all these things that signal to the audience what's coming next, right? It's a form of communication. As an academic, I find myself, this is what we do. We let the audience know what comes next, right? We take them through on a journey, explain the thought process to this. The audience love to know what comes next. You can have a couple of twists and turns, a couple of surprises, but you don't want to do too many because then people get confused. When they get confused, they blame you, not themselves. And so you really want to take people through that journey with you. And I think that is something that you know, I try to do when I write or communicate. And finally, don't believe your own BS. Now, for the younger audience and the member, I'll have to explain what BS is. It stands for bluff and showmanship. Don't believe your own bluff and showmanship. Once again, one of these ironic things in professional wrestling where you're pretending to be a bigger-than-life character, larger-than-life character, but all at the same time, there is a network of people around you, particularly the people you're working with, that allow you to do the stuff you're trying to do. And so at no point should you actually believe that you are as good as you're pretending to be. And so that's something that I think also serves anyone in any industry well. So that wrapped up that side of my life. I came back, and at that time, sort of in the early 2000s, there was this book by Naomi Klein. Some of you may have read it, called No Logo. It was quite revolutionary at the time because up to that book, brands and capitalism was seen as, you know, typically a positive thing. And there was this sort of, she kind of indicated there was a little bit of a problem sometimes when brands and corporations get too big and too powerful. So that was the milieu that I came back to. And I wanted to sort of, that really interested me because I myself never could imagine protesting against Starbucks or protesting against Nike. But there were people out there that felt strongly enough to do that. And so that was what really made me sort of interested in the area. I went back to the psych department, and unfortunately they didn't have a space for a PhD in that area. So the next logical thing was to go to the marketing department. And Rob Brody was the head of department at the time, and working with him or for him was Brett Martin. We got talking and hit it off pretty well, and he said, you know, I'd be willing to supervise you and your PhD in this area of what would later be called brand avoidance. And simultaneously at the time, this other chap, Dr. Doug Carey, was putting together a program called the BBIM, the Bachelor of Business Information Management. This was when university had the Tamaki campus, and there was a course called Understanding Consumers that needed to be taught at the Tamaki campus. Brett was teaching the main course in the main campus, and he basically said to me, look, Mike, I hear you've got a little bit of tutoring experience for psych. Why don't you take this paper and just go with it? So he literally had never taught a university course like be solely responsible for it, but he just gave it to me. Those of you that know Brett will know exactly why he did that. He wanted to focus on research. But to me, it was a great honor. I was like, wow, this whole thing is mine? Really? Take ownership? Great. Managed to get really good student evaluations that first time. In fact, one of my students is here. That's so great to see you 20 years later. Thank you for coming. Got really good student evaluations, and the university hasn't been able to get rid of me since. Fast forward a decade and a half maybe, and this chap here, Professor Bodo Lang, who's now at Massey, but was the head of department at the time, did an inception trick on me. He told me that he thought I would be good at academic leadership. And I thought, I can't think of anything worse but to lead a bunch of independent, critically minded academics. But he put that thought in my head, and then he kind of went away, and it percolated a bit. And then fast forward a few years, Dr. Rick Starr, who was the outgoing MBA director at the time, came back with the same proposition. He said, Mike, I'm stepping down. Do you want to be the MBA director? I was like, no, thank you, Rick. It wasn't the students that worried me. I loved the students. It was the staff that I would have to manage that freaked me out. But anyway, I did say yes, and it ended up being one of the best things I've ever done at university, apart from my research. Really enjoyed teaching and directing the MBA. They're the most passionate group of students you'll ever meet. They're here on a Tuesday night. I see most of them here. So it's really great. Thank you for coming, and thank you for giving me that opportunity. During that time, as the MBA director, which I still am, I got to work with Andrew Eberhard, the Associate Dean for Professional Programs. Fantastic person to work for. You can see him looking very relaxed there in his sneakers, avid runner. We suffer from the same genetic disease of being male and getting older. So he probably hasn't run as much as he has. So we both kind of hobble along. But no, thank you, Andrew, for making that job a pleasure. And last but not least, who's unfortunately she's not here because she's now the acting dean for the law school, our dean, Susan Watson, who I'm sure put in a good word for me to the vice chancellor when she was going through these promotions, because it is a vice chancellor decision, but I guess the positive remarks of your dean certainly help. So these are the people that I want to thank. I can't thank everyone today, but I've got some great co-supervisors and colleagues here, and my PhD students, of course. So these are the people that I felt had a more sort of distinctive role in this journey, this particular journey. So mentioning at the time, there was this no logo thing, and there was this other concept happening. It's called culture jamming, but it's basically, and I'll put up a couple of examples here. You'll, at first glance, you think, well, these are brands I recognize. It's Coke, it's Nike, it's Starbucks, it's BP, it's McDonald's, right? But if you take a closer look, you realize that it's not. It's not actually in favor of the brand. It is all against the brand. And the way it works is the brands have spent hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of dollars over the decades brainwashing us into knowing exactly what their brand symbols are made up of. And so it's ironic that these criticisms work simply because the brand is so recognizable, right? If it was a brand we didn't recognize, then this criticism would not work. And so this is called culture jamming because it's activists taking the culture of, I guess, excessive consumption that the brands are trying to propagate and jamming it against them. My favorite one is this one here, which I use all the time when I'm teaching, is Avion. And what the brand activists have come to do is they've spelt it backwards, simple as that, showing that it's naive spelt backwards, because you just paid a premium for water, right? And so this was happening, which led me to want to do a PhD in this idea of brand avoidance, right? And the other two people I have to thank are my PhD mothers. First is Judy Motion. So what actually happened with Brett was he said yes to me, and then he left very quickly and got a promotion at the University of Queensland, but I'm still grateful he gave me a chance. Judy came in, was very generous, arranged a stipend using one of her research grants that made the whole PhD journey much easier, sort of like a living allowance. But then unfortunately, she had to go as well to Wollongong. Right? So at that point, I'm thinking, is it me? Right? But luckily, Denise, who's in the audience right there, stuck with me. She's the guardian angel that got me all the way through. We published a couple of papers out of my PhD about brand avoidance, and this is basically the framework. Now, we don't have time to go into it in detail, but essentially, before my PhD, there was a lot of work on brand loyalty, brand love, that sort of stuff. I kind of flipped that on its head as my thesis, and I said, look, sometimes brands can be negative things, right? They can be a negative promise, an incompatible promise, right? They can symbolize an undelivered promise or an unappealing promise, or maybe a detrimental promise to society, or simply an inadequate promise in terms of your deficit benefit to cost ratio. Right, so all of these things, simply put, is if you have a brand as an incompatible promise, it will lead to brand avoidance behavior. People will avoid your brand. And then this leads to a downward death spiral of the brand becoming a market-based liability rather than a market-based asset. So if we go back to the Avion example, you've got water, which is worth like 0.001 cent out of the tap. You put Avion with positive brand equity, all of a sudden you're paying more for that water than you would pay for petrol. Right? And that's where the branding literature kind of stopped. I said, well, what happens if that brand becomes negative? Let's say, for example, you learned that people were peeing in the bottling factory of Avion. Well, that turns the brand Avion into a market-based liability, which creates negative brand equity. And so it could get so bad that the brand would have to literally pay you to use their brand, right? And at that point, it goes into negative brand equity, and the brand has to be canned because it's not generating any more value. It's costing the company money. And that was basically the main thesis of my PhD. Right? At the same time, while I was doing this PhD, and Carla mentioned this a little bit, I put together this thing called the International Center of Anti-Consumption Research, and through the very helpful introduction from Karen Fernandez to some big wigs in consumer research, Russell Belk and Rob Kozinets. They're big deals in our area. They don't really mean much to anyone else outside of academia, but they're very nice people, very important people. They said, we really like what you're doing. We'd be keen to be involved. And then all the people around the edges are just a small handful of the really great collaborations I've had over the last 2 decades of people that have helped me run these international symposiums every 2 years. So I ran the first one when Richard Brooks was the head of department at the time in 2006. Russell Belk came along and did a keynote, and I've run one every 2 years except for COVID, and the next one, in fact, is in Quebec at the end of the year in October. So very fortunate, and I calculated at one point that through this network and the various conferences that we've put together, we've generated sort of an opportunity for publication for hundreds of scholars around the world. And the only reason I came up with this thing was, as a PhD student, I didn't know I wasn't allowed to, and so I just kind of did it. And it ended up being something that lasted, right? So that was really good. At one of these conferences, I met this guy called Andreas Chasidakis, who I called Alex for the first 3 years of our relationship, that he corrected me. He's a super sweet guy. I think I gaslighted him into thinking his name was Alex. But anyway, we had the same problem being anti-consumption researchers, that sometimes scholars can be a little bit facetious sometimes, and we would always get these arguments that, how can there be this thing called anti-consumption? We have to consume food and oxygen as humans. And we'd be like, yeah, I know, we get that, but that's not really what we're talking about. Our argument was that anti-consumption could happen simultaneously with consumption. And so we got together and wrote a paper that tried to kind of put to rest this argument that anti-consumption wasn't a thing, right? And so this is the example we use in the article. Reasons against is what we argued was the core of anti-consumption, understanding the reasons against. And the reason, well, the value of understanding reasons against goes beyond just an assumption that the reasons for are just a mere logical opposite. Now there's a lot to get your head around, so I'll explain it this way using Nike, right? So there are people that love Nike for the aggressive advertising that they have, and that there are people that love Nike for the way that the shoe is designed, the form and function. Simultaneously, there'll be other people that hate Nike for their aggressive advertising, and there'll be people that hate Nike because the form and function doesn't work for them, right? And so this is an example where the opposites for consumption are the exact opposite for anti-consumption, right? There's no added value for anti-consumption here. As a brand manager, there's not much you can do with this information, because if you were to change the advertising to appeal to the people that currently hate your advertising, then you simultaneously annoy the people that like your advertising, right? If you redesign the shoe to make it work better for the people that have feet that don't work with Nike shoes, you annoy the people that like the way they're currently designed. So there's no win there. Where we come in and say, look, there are reasons against Nike where there is no logical opposite for Nike. An example is people do not choose to consume Nike because they want to support child labor, right? So as a marketing manager now, all of a sudden you've got something to work with. You can address the reasons against Nike, such as by improving the working conditions of your workers, and do so in a way that does not affect the people that currently are fans of Nike. Because there won't be, by addressing and improving work conditions, there won't be a group of people out there that'll be like, oh man, I used to love Nike because they exploited children, now I can't buy them, right? That doesn't happen, right? And so that's the value of the reasons against framework. And I've been asked subsequently to apply the same framework to the red meat sector, because there's lots of reasons for and against meat, and sometimes there are reasons against meat that don't have a logical opposite. So there's some legs in this concept. So that was the anti-consumption from a commercial perspective. The next piece of work I want to talk about is the use of anti-consumption in public policy, particularly health. So I did a bit of work more than 10 years apart looking at the anti-vax movement, right? First was about MMR, so measles, mumps, rubella anti-vax movement in 2011, and then the next one more than 10 years later looking at vaccine hesitancy in COVID. And we wanted to see, you know, what remains the same, what's different, what are the reasons why people are against vaccines. The chap on the left, Mike Mell, is an ex-honor student, and the guy on the right is Professor Damien Chenet from the University of Normandy in France. So we did some work, and but before I sort of talk to you to the findings, let's talk a little bit about the anti-vax movement. This is a movement that has been around ever since the vaccines were invented. The very first vaccine was invented by a guy called Dr. Edward Jenner. He used cowpox material to treat smallpox, right? And even back then, you could see, 200 years ago, there was this misinformation that was happening, right? If you take cowpox, I don't know if you can see, bits of you will turn into a cow. So a lot of scaremongering, a lot of sort of non-scientific sort of scaremongering and misinformation. You know, I'd hope to think that we've moved beyond that in this day and age. Maybe not. But before we make fun of RFK, there are actually other celebrities as well that are well known for their anti-vax sort of sentiments. They have a lot of clout, and obviously then influence the situation in terms of interfering with uptake of vaccines. But it's not just in America. In the UK, we also see the same thing. Trust in vaccines is reducing. So this graph here, just very simply, they ask a question, which basically goes, do you think there's dodgy stuff in vaccines they're not telling you about, in layman's speak, right? And normally people say, no, I don't think there's any dodgy stuff. But what you see is the number of no's is going down and the number of yeses is going up, which points to a sort of growing distrust in the medical establishment, right? So more people are now thinking, yes, there are dodgy things in vaccines they're not telling us about, and less people are saying, no, vaccines are safe. I mean, still the majority trust, but there's that trend that's concerning. And this plays out in behavior as well, with the vaccine rate in the UK being under the World Health Organization's suggested rate. New Zealand's no better. In fact, we're even lower. right? So this is an international problem. We wanted to understand what drives vaccine hesitancy or the anti-vax movement. So we did some research, and this is the conceptual model we came up with. This is from the more recent 2022 article, but essentially it was exactly the same as, so COVID vaccine hesitancy was driven by exactly the same stuff that drives MMR vaccine hesitancy 10 years ago or more, even longer, probably. And I want to talk about the two different factors. The stuff in the circle is the two things that were different with COVID. I'll get into those a bit later. But on the right side, you have stable factors. So these are the people that are ideologically opposed to vaccines, right? They either think it's like it's against their religion, or they don't like, it might be political opposition, not liking the government to tell you what you can or can't do with your body, that sort of stuff. And so they get grouped under ideological opposition, and these people are very difficult to shift, right? In fact, they're almost impossible to shift in their thinking. So we'll just park them aside. As a public policy person, you want to know what you can do. So what you can influence are the contextual factors. So the way the contextual factors work is the people, and sometimes very reasonable people, will be vaccine hesitant because of information overload and uncertainty in particularly social media, the internet these days. Those two things, information overload and uncertainty, feed into their risk to benefit ratio calculation that they do. And this is something that I do when I explain it. Okay, so this is what's happening in their head. There's the idea that there's the threat of getting a disease and the damage that getting a disease will be, right? The risk is up here. Then there is the risk of the vaccine, which is down here, right? It's typically safe, but no medical procedure is 100% safe, and we all know people that have suffered medical complications from vaccines. So that does exist. That risk is real. It's just down here. And normally, the risk to benefit ratio is like this, right? But ironically, as more people get the vaccine and the more effective a vaccine becomes, the risk of catching the disease decreases because you got herd immunity and less people have the disease. So you start thinking, I might not catch the disease. And so that risk goes down. However, the risk of the vaccine always stays the same because it's already been tested to be as safe as possible. That's hit a rock bottom, right? And so what's actually happening in the minds of some people that are vaccine hesitant is that this gap is doing this. It's getting a lot closer than it can actually by scientific fact, but because humans can't think in such sort of small numbers or big numbers, they start to flip over sometimes, and some people will start to think that the risk of the vaccine is greater than the risk of the disease. And that's exactly what's happened. The risk to benefit ratio flips over, and that explains why even very reasonable people can be vaccine hesitant. So as a public policy person, what you want to do is talk to them about the actual odds, right? The odds of something going wrong if you catch measles, for example, versus the odds of something that might go wrong because of the vaccine. They will always be actually very far apart, but perceptually, people think they're closer together. Some people think they're closer together than they are. The other thing to add up on this is, okay, so that was exactly the same, MMR and COVID. The stuff on the left only happened with COVID, which was interesting. So branding effect and country of origin effect. Two things we discovered that sort of affected COVID vaccine hesitancy that didn't really come up when we did the research on measles, mumps, and rubella ages ago. And this will be familiar to you guys. If you remember when they started rolling out the COVID vaccine, there was like the different brands, right? There was like, oh, I want the Pfizer one. I don't want that other one. And so there was a branding effect, which shouldn't come as a surprise because we all know as marketers that branding is a big risk reducer. So it should come as no surprise that it should also affect COVID vaccine sort of preference or hesitancy. The other thing, country of origin effect, this is where the country it becomes a brand of its own. And you guys will totally remember this. It's like, okay, if you're traveling to Russia or China, get the German vaccine here before you get the Chinese or Russian vaccine, right? There was that country of origin effect that was happening. And we see that happening in automobiles and appliances and all that sort of stuff as well. Yeah, so that was the findings for that piece of work. Just to wrap up that piece of work. So there is a paradox that we found, which we thought was kind of cool as well. So normally when I do study on anti-consumption, people that share the same anti-consumption sentiment will like to hang out together, right? So if you imagine the people that are anti-Ford because they're Holden fans or vice versa, the Ford people want to hang out with Ford people, and the Holden people want to hang out with the Holden people, and they want to put down the other brand. Now, for the anti-vax movement, this is kind of reversed. Like large numbers of people sharing the same sentiment can't actually hang out together, right? They're incompatible because, ironically, the anti-vax movement is only possible through high consumption. They need that herd immunity in order to be able to believe the things that they believe, right? And so we thought that was kind of ironic in that people that share the same sentiment shouldn't be hanging out together because there will be reduced herd immunity if you have a whole bunch of anti-vax people hanging out together. So Just to sort of, I guess, take a step back and look at sort of reflect on 20 years of this research, I want to talk about what I think is the one main reason that causes anti-consumption and why it's really not so bad. So I'll finish off with some examples from industry. Now, I believe that the main reason for anti-consumption and market rejection is a lack of trust. It's a lack of trust in the process that makes the product, or it's a lack of trust in the product itself, or a lack of trust in the brand or the organization, or even the establishment, right? So that lack of trust then leads to a reduced social license to operate. And with that reduced social license to operate, it becomes very difficult for brands or organizations to come back from that, because anything they try will be met with skepticism. So I think lack of trust is kind of the key driver. However, does that mean you just, as a brand manager, you bury your heads in the sand, you pretend that if you can't hear the complaints, they don't exist? Well, of course not, right? There is a competitive advantage to be learned or to be leveraged by learning about the reasons against your brand or your company or your sector. And so one really famous example of this is the Dove Real Beauty campaign. So some of you guys will recognize this. It's a really famous ad campaign or marketing campaign. And this came about during a period where the cosmetics industry was undergoing a backlash against them because they were accused of promoting unrealistic ideals of beauty, right? And so not just Dove, but all cosmetic industries were coming under fire. Dove very cleverly leaned into it. They understood the reasons against the cosmetic industry, and then they launched an entire marketing campaign about this idea of real beauty. And what they did, first of all, was they showed what it took, what the cosmetic industry did to make an average person on the right look like a supermodel on the left. You know, hours of makeup, hair, wardrobe, photoshopping, all the whole works, right? And then they leveraged this sort of reveal, this anti-reveal, and by using real women in their ads. And they became known for this whole real beauty thing, and it's still a concept that they're still using in the Dove range, right? So that's a really good example of, by understanding why people are against your sector, you can actually position yourself to be different and seen as better and address some of the reasons against your sector. Another example is McDonald's. So we know they have salads. We know that hardly anyone, I don't know anyone that buys a salad at McDonald's. They probably make a loss on it, but it is a necessary antidote towards the reasons against McDonald's. So McDonald's is blamed for contributing to the obesity epidemic. And so they have to have a product that allows them to say, look, it's not our fault. We're not causing obesity because we have salads. If you had a real problem with our junk food, then you would buy our salads, right? Which I guess makes logical sense, right? They're putting the sort of their ownership back. I mean, it might be that the salads don't taste as good or fill you up as much as their other food, but at least they've done it as a response to the reasons against their brand or the fast food sector in general. So there's that's happening. And then this is another example that's probably less well known, Chupa Chups. Well, everyone knows a Chupa Chup, right? 100% sugar it used to be. And now they know there's a backlash against sugar. You know, some people kind of jokingly say sugar is the next P, right? It's like, so there's this movement against sugar, and Chupa Chups does a real sort of change in their business model and make their product 100% sugar-free, right? And this is demonstrated by the ants avoiding the lollipop. Right? But you have to ask, if the ants are avoiding the lollipop, should you be eating it as well? And then we have this really famous campaign by Patagonia. So 2011, they took a double-page spread ad on the New York Times, and they told people not to buy their jacket. Now, at the time, this was crazy. Like, who spends that much money on a double-page spread in the New York Times only to tell people not to buy their brand? What you don't see is at the bottom of that ad is some fine print that basically positions their brand against fast fashion. So once again, they knew that there was this backlash that was mounting against fast fashion, against disposable sort of, outerwear. And so they positioned themselves, and in the fine print it said, we believe in products that last. If you have a damaged jacket, bring it back and we'll fix it free of cost, right? And it was more than just virtue signaling, because they are one of the few brands that actually do what they believe in. They're third-party certified by B Corp, right? And really kind of and they've done a number of other campaigns through the years that really promote this idea of being anti-excessive consumption. And that's a very important part of their brand now, and that allows them to charge a premium for the products that they sell. So in closing, and we're doing really good on time here, which is great, anti-consumption is not just the simple opposite of consumption, as I've hopefully managed to convince you all. There's sort of this additional power that you get from understanding the specific reasons against consumption. And so that Nike example is probably the best one I can think of. And then I want to draw an analogy to medicine. A lot of the progress in medicine has come through a focus on pathology and disease rather than just on health, right? And so I guess I apply this to branding research and marketing, is that you can look at all the good stuff that's happening with your brand, but by understanding some of the bad stuff, you can actually make it better. Because only by understanding what is wrong can you enhance what is right. And so I think that's actually it. So I've managed to finish that in a lot quicker than I thought it would take. Thank you so much.